And just so you're aware, you might not be with us for an hour and 15 for the first time in a while. This is not probably the most in-depth organizing idea that we have in kindergarten. It's not to say that it's not important, but just that it doesn't have quite the same amount of sort of meat to it that we had when we're talking about, let's say, matter, which was a big one, and that's still one that you should probably spend the most of your time on because it feeds so many of the other organizing ideas. But we're hoping to give you enough starting points here to get you started on energy for kindergarten, and then it really links very much the same in similarities into grade 1. So without any further ado, let's continue on. So I won't play this particular video, but I will tell you about it. So generally when we do the land acknowledgement, we try to include one of the components in here that might link to kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about energy and what it is that we need to make connections with. One of the things that I included in here was the Grandfather 7 teachings, and it really fits well, not only with the linkages of the animals, but it's the meaning of the animals, the meaning of the importance of those animals to the environment and Mother Earth. So I thought it was a good fit. If you haven't, or if you're not familiar with it, it's a short little sort of cartoon segment, but it will tell you enough to get you going if that's something that you want to pursue and use as you move through some of the teachings that you do with the students. It's also a great link for health and wellness and for cell. So if you're looking for any of those connections as well, they're really, really good that way. So we'll begin with our acknowledgement. In the spirit of reconciliation, we want to acknowledge that this gathering is taking place on traditional lands across the province of Alberta, home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We acknowledge that this land is a traditional meeting ground, giving voice to its original peoples and the story of creation of this country in a way that history has forgotten.
The story of...
Whoops, we don't need to play that one right now. So we're going to unpack energy sort of in, it's got two sort of big rocks to it if we were to look at it from that perspective. And one of them just is, what is movement? Like for students to explore what movement is and what does that feel like? And I know we do that with them on a day-by-day basis, and especially with the little ones, they're always on the move. So that's not something that's new to them. But to define that for them in something that makes a little bit more sense, and also something that gives them the context of when they move to grade 1, when they're expected to know what an explanation of movement is, that they can start to unpack it sort of from those 3 different elements of speed and pathways and time that it takes to go from one location to another. So those are the kinds of pieces that we want them to be able to understand from kindergarten. And then to do exactly as we said, to explore what are the ways that they can explore the different types of movement and what movement actually is, and how does that move me from one location to another, and how do animals move, those types of things. Not getting into it really deeply, but definitely getting into it from the understanding through experience. And that's really kind of where we want to go. So I'm going to turn it over to Ted, and he's going to start us off, and then I'll jump in again with our resources.
Thanks. Just a quick overview again. Science is new, of course, to kindergarten. It's a subject that wasn't isolated and taught as a specific course in kindergarten in the older years. We could see that in the years following kindergarten, from grade 1 to 6, there were different topics that were introduced in science, and that's what they were. They were topics. And we have the icon of silos there, just to I think to create a metaphor of what the old system was like, the old curriculum was like, very much a topic-based silo system. But when we go to the new curriculum, we see that there's lots of links and interconnections between those silos, and beginning from kindergarten now all the way up to grade 6. And there are different things that are put into that curriculum, is represented by the yellow circle with the question marks. There's something that goes into this curriculum that makes that fluidity and that exchange of ideas back and forth, not only between what are no longer topics, but organizing ideas in the course, but between the different grades and the organizing ideas, because those also are repeated throughout the grades, as we know, the same organizing ideas. So the things that help create that fluid and that movement or that transfer ideas and thoughts are the ideas of concepts. And if I would give you the big picture of what that looks like in terms of energy from a conceptual point of view. But take a look at the next series of slides then. We know that in kindergarten, if you've taken a look at the organizing idea, the focus is on movement and the idea that objects and animals move in different ways if you follow the concept map down, and animals move for different reasons. And what movement is really defined as a change in location, and a location is position. Those ideas are expanded in grade 1 further. And in the next slide, we'll see that we add on in the terms of different ways. We're looking at direction in grade 1, pathway, and speed at the bottom part. And we also start looking at not forces necessarily. We don't introduce the concept of forces, but we talk about what influences the movement of objects in grade 1. And that includes shape, the material composition, and the surface texture, as well as how they interact with other objects. Moving quickly on to grade 2, we add that the focus now becomes on the movement of objects, and those objects are sound and light, and how do they move? What are the sources of sound and light, and what are the behaviors? And finally, by the time we get to grade 3, we add on that movement is the result of certain forces that act on the object. And we could talk about contact forces, their strength and direction, and the different types of contact forces that happen. So when you step back and take a look at the big picture, you can see that kindergarten starts building that whole foundation of movement, and it's built on through the grades. And again, another example or a different way of looking at how the big ideas in the organizing ideas are all linked together to create a constantly growing understanding of movement and energy at the younger grades. Specifically for kindergarten, what we're looking at in more detail is the ways of movement include those identified in the green. We got straight lines and curves and circles and so on. The ways of movement is focused mainly on animals, because animals and people can do other types of movements besides the way they move. Their ways of movement can include crawling and hopping and swimming, whereas objects may not necessarily do those things. And then, of course, we look at the reasons for movement into 3 reasons that are explored in kindergarten. They're seeking food and water, exercising, and escaping danger, and those are ones that are introduced at this level. Again, just a reminder that we do have these concept progressions at the ARPD site. There's a link at the bottom of the page. And what these do is, again, introduce or give you a picture of the key concepts that begin in kindergarten and see what moves into grade 1 and grade 2, so that as we are preparing and helping our students move forward through the grades, we can see that movement is one of those things that does continue on through the grades along the way. So this is just a good, and again, handy thing to see what's coming after you, to see what you may want to emphasize during the course of the year. And again, besides the concepts and those big ideas flowing through the different organizing ideas through the different grades, we also have those skills and procedures. And I've highlighted computer science and scientific methods, not for kindergarten. It's not, you don't have scientific methods in kindergarten, but some of the scientific method skills are there, such as observing. We know that observing and not making observations is introduced in Earth systems and matter. So that's part of it. But we also know in computer science, there's some other skills and procedures, such as making directions and following directions, which can be used in each of the organizing ideas, especially energy. When we're talking about computer science, with the focus being on following directions, we know that if we have students moving in certain directions by following instructions, then we'll be helping to expand and integrate those computer science skills and procedures into the organizing idea. Specifically for kindergarten skills, the key one in the learning outcomes that children explore movement of objects, humans and other animals. And the italicized words of ask questions, predict, find answers, and there should be one more is observe, because we know that in kindergarten, students have done some observing before. Those are some of the skills that are really integrated into grade 1 scientific methods. The whole investigation process, which is introduced in grade 1s, includes things such as the steps of asking questions, making the predictions, finding the answers, and so on. And when they're exploring, then perhaps those kind of key things can be a framework for you to help when you're trying to collect data for reporting and so on, to see what are some things students can do as they explore. And those might be some things you may want to look at. We know that predict is formally introduced in grade 1 in scientific methods. But again, when we look at the competencies, which again are on the Learn Alberta site, in kindergarten, one of the competencies for critical thinking is that students do make predictions. So it wouldn't be necessarily out of their league to have students make some predictions in terms of how animals move. We'll take a look at that a little bit later. Besides the key verb in the learner outcome, we also have skills and procedures verbs. And this is a tough one because there really aren't many. For example, if you take a look at the first cusp line, we have just moving objects in a variety of ways, identifying objects that move, identifying objects that do not move. It's not really a skill that they're doing. They're really demonstrating their understanding of movement and their understanding of that, of objects and things like that. So it's not necessarily a skill, but it's also something they can do. They're going to identify the objects, right? That move. We know they have that conceptual understanding of movement and objects that move and don't move. And we're talking having students move objects in the variety of ways. They're really demonstrating their understanding of zigzag or up and down or curve or circular pattern. Similar with identifying human movement. Observing, that's one of those skills that do show up in other skills procedure statements in kindergarten. And again, observing is watching and using our senses, which is introduced in matter, and again in nerve systems, making observations and using our senses to determine how to imitate how animals move. You'll notice I include the word compare at the bottom. Compare various ways that humans and other animals can move is not anything that's in any of the skills and procedure statements. But when we take a look at the left side, you can see I have the green compare statement highlighted. Compare is one of the things that is used in kindergarten. And this may be a good way, again, to deepen their understanding of movement when they can start comparing and contrasting those. So when you take a look at the list on the left, I wouldn't hesitate to use any of those skills that are highlighted for kindergarten to help them deepen their understanding. Instead of just identifying, we can discuss their movement and so on to gain a deeper understanding. We can go to the next slide, Chris. When we're talking about the movement of all those ideas, including the concepts, understandings, and the skills through the various silos or through the various organizing ideas, it really is boiled down, again, teaching for transfer. And I'm not going to go through this. We've been through it many times before. But what we're looking at is making sure students know that surface level stuff through pre-assessment and observations. If they don't know it, then we do some surface level instruction, some basic things dealing with specific skills or concepts. Movement may be a new concept to the students, so we'll have to stop and introduce it there. Things like zigzag and curve may be new, and we would know that by doing some pre-assessments before we begin the surface level instructions if they don't know it. And then we go into the deep level, and that's where we really give them lots of iterations, give students lots of context to practice showing their understanding or practice doing those skills. And finally, when we feel comfortable, then we move on. We feel comfortable that they're independent with it, we can move on to the transfer and really give them an unfamiliar context to either move and observe things in different ways. We can go to the next slide, Chris. And yeah, this is just a graphic. Maybe we should have just had this one, not the prior one. But as we know, when we're teaching and learning, that there's constant interaction between those phases of learning. We may begin at the surface and try to get to the deep, but may have to come back and do some reteaching or at the surface level. Or we think kids are ready for that transfer where they're quite independent with things, and we do some observations and no, they're not back. We have to come back and give them more experiences in the deepening. So that's what that graphic is trying to explain with those spiral arrows there. And the way Chris and I are unpacking, again, this organizing idea is similar to a little bit different than when we've done in the past. No, Earth Systems, we also unpacked this way. Sorry. Where we're looking at, if we're going to assess our students with this, let's begin with that. We plan with the end in mind by planning backwards, which means taking a look at what is the learner outcomes or the understandings that we want to get it, determine how we're going to assess that, and then planning our activities so that when we give the students that transfer activity, which is that assessment, we know that they're going to be successful at it because we've done some teaching at the surface and deep level prior to giving them that assessment. So that's what we're taking a look at here. I've highlighted the first cusp line in terms of what might be an example of how to, or an example of providing an assessment at the front end. And then what we're going to do then is go through some surface level things to say, well, if we're going to have this assessment, what might students do? This is a really tough, not tough, but a really difficult, well, maybe tough, difficult. It's really, we've been struggling with this organizing idea because there's some, as Chris said at the start, some really, it's not a very big and robust organizing idea. And so try to create those big level assessments is a little bit tricky. So what we thought we'd do is just say, look, here's a checklist of just for example, the ways plant or animal objects can move. And what we want to do then is give them as many contexts with many different scenarios where they could see movement and describe movement of things or manipulate things so they move in certain ways. And we have a checklist that you may want to use as you're doing that, which really could be your assessment for this piece. So if you could just click on that checklist, Chris. You'll notice that this checklist includes all those ways of moving that were included in that first cusp line. So this could be basically your assessments as students are doing the activities. It could be in a gym class, it could be an art class, it could be a variety of things where students can demonstrate movement of objects in a variety of ways. And certainly we could put more on there if your students are able to deal with those. So that would be the way I would assess this. As an example of how that might be assessed. And if this is how you're going to assess students is by giving them this check mark and giving them a context, and you're going to do your observations, then there's some surface level teaching to do. Do students know what zigzag is? Do they know what a straight line is, what up, down is, and so on? And so that's where Chris is going to take us now through some surface level activities that maybe or that will be helpful if we're going to use an assessment such as a checklist to help our students demonstrate, give our students an opportunity to demonstrate their understandings. We can skip that next slide, Chris, and go on to the surface level activities.
So I think just by nature of what it is that we're asking them to do is we need to know what do they even think movement is. If you were to ask them to explain it to us and even explain it to a friend, what would they say movement is? So you might just start with something as simple as, can you show me movement? And not define it, just say, can you show me movement and see what they do? Can you show me no movement? What would that be? Can you show me, point to something in the classroom? Can you identify? Remember there was that verb in there, identify. Can you identify something that has movement? Identify something that doesn't have movement? And then how would they explain it? So it's really that pre-assessment piece is really important for them. But when we talk about movement, if we look at it from your curriculum perspective, it's already defined for you. And remember, a lot of the terms that are in your science curriculum are defined right within your document. So movement is a change in position or location over time. So given that we're in kindergarten, we need to make sure that we understand what those two words actually mean. So what is location? So again, we might ask them, what do you think the word location means? And we could use a simple graphic like this, where we have this little lady standing at the end and she's moving herself to the end of that bar or wherever that part is that she's walking. So it had a starting point and a finishing point. I've changed from where I started to where I finished. There was space in between, and that gives me a new location. And so that would be a simple way of just sort of identifying or demonstrating for them what that might mean, and then getting them to model it, just standing up in the classroom. Can you change location? Can you put down a book beside you or something down by your foot, and then show me that you've changed location from there? And how would you describe how you got there? Did you walk there? And maybe you even want to do a little math and say, how many steps did you count to get there, right? So just adding a few things into it. What about change of position? What does that mean? So they could be all sitting on the carpet during this time. We're doing some instructional time, and we say, if you changed position and didn't face me, where would you be? So they might go to the side, they might go turn right around. But again, just so that they're learning the difference between location and position. So again, we have an example that we could show them, and then we could ask them to model what they believe that to be, where it would be sitting on the floor, maybe turning themselves around, just skirting their feet around, or standing up and turning a different direction, whatever the case may be. So just practicing those types of things, the difference between location and position, so that they understand that both of those demonstrate movement. We also want them to be able to identify things that move and do not move. Can they find things in the classroom that do not move? Can they find things that are good examples of things that do move? And we're not concerned right now of what that's made of. We're not concerned if it's an animal or whatever. What is it that moves? What is it that doesn't move? And then we can ask them again, how do you know that this is movement? How did you know this thing moved? Well, we just defined what location and position is. So did it move to another place? If it was a fish in the tank, it went from this side of the aquarium to that side of the aquarium. So yes, it moved. It changed its location, and it moved over to this side of the tank. So we want them to start practicing their description of how they're going to justify to us something is movement or is not movement. Want them to start learning to use that language. Depending on where you are, could they go outside for a walk? Could they find examples of things that move and do not move there? Right? I might have a huge tree that is fixed in the ground, but the branches are able to move, right? So again, it might be a combination then of what's moving and what isn't moving. The big tree itself probably isn't moving, maybe at the top, but we're talking about the branches, they're able to move. Okay, am I able to take a cement pole that is sitting in the middle of the ground that holds our merry-go-round or whatever it is that they have in the playground? That's not moving. But does the spinner itself move? Yes, it does. What does it move? It moves in a circle. So we're going to talk about what kinds of movement there is. There's a couple of videos here that you might find helpful as well. And just again, to reiterate, I wouldn't do these all on the first day. I would do one at sort of every second day. I would have something just to bring back and refresh their memory about what we've been learning. Because every time we watch a video, there's always going to be something a little bit new in it. So in this case, we're talking about the movement of animals. So now I might watch this. Now that I know a little bit about movement, I might look at these animals and ask, what did we learn about these animals? What did we learn about how they moved? What did we learn about, did they all move the same way? Did they all move the same speed? That's part of grade 1, but still it's a common sense type of thing. Are they all moving exactly the same way? So speed is going to come into that as well, or how quickly they move. Movement of animals, again, and this one here is another one. So both of them offer just a little bit different. This one is very real. It shows them actual animals. This one shows you a graphic or a cartoon approach to it. So what did you notice and what did you wonder? And there's lots of wonders that will come out of the first one because it's real animals. So they'll have some wonders about each one. And the advantage is that you can pause the video at any time after an animal and say, what did we see about this animal? What did we learn about this animal's movement? Do anybody have any wonders about this animal, right? So they're just adding that little piece to it as well. And maybe some things come up that you've covered in living systems already that you could bring into this as a quick review.
Welcome to.
Oops, sorry. So when we look at movement, we're really trying to get them to start thinking about what are the kinds of movement that we have. And again, these will, again, in pathways come up in grade 1. But this is a good starting place for them is, does everything move the same? Does everything move in a straight line? Or does everything move in a circle? And the answer is no. We know that things vary on how they move, depending on whether it's inanimate, animate, in other words, alive, not alive. So I can have up and down. They might know that from a teeter-totter in the playground. They might know something in a straight line, could be a train, in this case, just going across the room, could be something as simple as just watching or looking down a street and I see that it goes straight down and there's no curves in that street. So again, just finding examples of movement that can go this way. Merry-go-round, going around in circles. Do they have one of those twirlers on the playground that they can use? What about a zigzag motion? Can they show us a zigzag motion? Do they know what a zigzag motion is? Do they know how a snake is different when a snake moves versus a dog, right? And maybe I don't ask them what a zigzag motion is. Maybe I ask them is, can you show me how a dog walks and moves? So they might have some fun getting on all fours. Then we might ask them, how does a snake move? And is a snake move in the same directions in the same way that a dog does? And just having those conversations. And then the back and forth movement that you would see on a swing. Sometimes some animals, you see bees that go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So they have a bit of a zigzag pattern. So again, we want them to be able to identify those pieces. You could even do this with sort of some talk on outside on, if it's a nice time and you're doing this in spring or in fall, where they can take some chalk outside and they can show you what those different pathways are, right? And then if they draw it long enough, they can, even in groups, have their own color of chalk, create the pathway, and then I can walk on that pathway and I can show you that I can even follow that, right? And just some things like that. If we want to get a little bit deeper, there are 2 booklets that I was able to find. Both of these are EPIC books, so not a purchase necessary. One of them is just what is motion, and then the other one describing motion. So describing something as simple as going bowling. So a ball whirls down, the ball doesn't necessarily always go straight, and there's lots of reasons for that. We don't have to get into the physics of it right now. But again, it can go faster, it can go slower. Sometimes it's very consistent, and depending how fast it goes, it might have the effect of being able to put the pins over. So this is just 2 very simple books that would work really well with them as well. If you're into case studies, you may prefer to read the book first before you teach me a lot of things and use the book as the starting point for discussion. And what did we learn from the book? What did the book teach us about movement? So I could flip the whole conversation we've just had and start with a story. And from the story, how do I build what it is I need to know? What do I find out that they already know? And what do I find out that I still need to sort of fill in a few holes and gaps? So again, depending on which approach you prefer, we could have something as simple as this. Can we name the type of path that each of these animals is using and typically flies in? Could they, if you do it on ledger size paper and you photocopy it, could they extend it? So there's a bit of a, it's not really a pattern per se, but could they extend the notion of what they've described to you as being back and forth or straight line or waved or curved or whatever? Okay, so can they extend it? Could they show you what a next piece might look like? And another one that's good with that too is, I'm just thinking too, is some of the little ones that we've had do this is just, can they stay on the lines, right? When we're practicing, can they color? This is another one of those, can they trace it and can they stay on the line? So can you imitate? That actually comes up in your curriculum, is students are able to imitate the motion of animals or objects. In this case, we're going to talk about animals. So if I don't tell you the name of the animal, just as again, it's just an FYI for me to see what they know. Most of them, some of them might even say, hey, we have one of those birds at home. We have a budgie bird at home. So we're going to say, I'm going to point to a picture without naming the picture. And I'm going to ask you, can you show me how that animal moves? And let's see what they know and what they don't know. So this is a budgie bird. They can fly. Some people will say, but they can also walk, and they can. And do they walk slowly? Do they walk quickly? They have short little feet, but they can go pretty quick when they want to go. So they have 2 possibilities, but flight is really the one we're looking for. Some of them might not know what that animal is, but again, we might just say, how do you think that animal is going to move? So maybe they'll kind of get the idea, with 2 feet, I'm going to be hopping around a lot. Some of them might already know what it's going to do. Can I put these feet down and use it to move forward? I can, but that's not typically the way they move. Traditionally, it's just by hopping. What about an earthworm? What about a puppy dog, right? So again, giving them the opportunity to show us what they are able to model as far as, or imitate in this case, how animals move. And if we stay with the movement idea, there are two different slide decks that are hidden behind here. We'll just do one. They're similar, but they don't ask the same things. They use very similar pictures though. So what motion do you see in each one of these slide decks? So let's just go with the first one. So if I'm looking at motion, we're asking them to describe for us what kind of motion is this? It's a throwing motion, sure, but is it a straight line motion? Is it what kind of a pathway is it taking? So if I'm a good ball thrower and it's going to land right in his glove, then I hopefully have thrown it in a fairly straight line so it doesn't bop him in the nose. What kind of movement do I see here? Okay, I'm going to see doors that slide to the side. I'm going to see an escalator. And again, some of your children might not know what an escalator is. This is one of those pedway ones. It doesn't have stairs on it, so they just stand on it and it just rolls them up. So again, what kind of motion am I seeing? So having them discuss that, and again, it might be a brand new visual for some students because they've never seen one of those happen. A lot of your kids might be swimmers. So again, what kind of motion am I seeing? This case, am I going in a straight line? Hopefully yes, but not necessarily. Depends on how good a swimmer you are and what your sense of direction is. When they go out in the playground, they're going down the slides. And other things. I mean, these are just sample questions. We're not suggesting that these are the end all be all, but what are the motions that we're finding in here? What do they see when they go home? What are some different kinds of descriptors that they can see for movement at home? So pulling a drawer open. If they have a trampoline in the background, they can go up and down movement, right? If they've ever been to a fair, they've gone to a Ferris wheel and they're going around. They might even have, if you catch it on the bottom right here, you've got that boat that kind of goes back and forth when they sit in it. So that swaying motion, that's possibility in there. And then maybe they'll have other descriptions of things that they can tell you. They've been on tilt-a-whirls where it goes from one direction to another. It's kind of wavy and zigzaggy, and then it starts to spin around, right? So just getting them to talk about and think about some of their personal experiences. Some of the measuring tools that we have are collapsible measuring tools, but they make a great example if you open them up as a zigzag. So what else do you have? Sometimes little gates that you have for little children not to go down the stairs are very much those collapsibles, but they're also very much the same thing as a zigzag look to them. So what can children think of that fit some of those bills? What about when it is wintertime? We go tobogganing. I just recently showed the same pictures to a group that I work with in Mexico, and one of them put in the chat box right away saying, I don't think our children even know what that is because they've never seen snow before and they've never seen a toboggan before. So again, it was just a good experience for them to have a conversation about what does it mean to slide on snow, right? Something that they don't experience. So there's another slide deck which looks at things just a little bit differently, but there's two of them there for you to access if you so choose.
Chris, if I can just interrupt for a second.
Sure can.
Again, when we're talking about getting students from surface to deep to transfer, again, the key is really the many iterations and the many different examples and contexts. And you say Chris pulled out a whole variety of different contexts. Some we've imagined like a sliding drawer in a cabinet, and there's movement there. And just finding those different contexts for kids to explore and to ask questions about movement, I think is really the whole secret to moving from that surface to deep and finally to transfer. So just wanted to point that out because I just love those examples.
Well, and just getting them to walk around their home and come back with some examples that they found would be great ones as well, right? So as Ted had mentioned, we're not always just going to do everything at surface level and then move to deep and then move to transfer. You're going to, as we sort of unpack our organizing ideas, we learned that there's some pieces that I'm going to do that are surface level. We got some terminology, we got some foundational understanding. Now I'm going to move to some of those examples. I want you to start showing me as we start moving through them that you're learning more and more and more, and you can make more connections. And once I feel comfortable that you know what you're doing, then I can give you a brand new scenario for that transfer. But now I'm going to go back again because I have another section in here that I want to look at. So it may well mean that I need to go back and do just a bit of a review or maybe a double check to make sure that their understanding for the foundational pieces are there. In some cases, they just slide right into it, so I don't need to worry about these. But in this case, what helps us move? Like how is it that we move? So again, we might want to just revisit a little bit about what do we know? What do we not know? What are we more familiar with? What do some of these pictures tell us about movement? Do I know anything about different kinds of animals that have these kinds of feet on them or lack of feet? So this is definitely a human, and we know what human feet can do, that we can move around. But where do these feet come from? Well, typically anything that's webbed means it's something that has been swimming. So then I can have that conversation, but I wouldn't say that to students. I would ask them, does anybody know where these feet might come from and how they're different from these feet? So the different might be easy for them to see, maybe not the understanding about why they're different, but children who live in the country will pretty much be able to tell you where these feet belong to and what they are. So again, depending on your location, depending on your children's experience, then we can have that conversation. How did these help me move versus how did these help me move? And what's so different about these feet versus these feet? What do these feet offer me? And yeah, it's a little bit of a diversion about from movement, but these feet can scratch and they can churn up the soil, and that means I can get different kinds of foods and I can pick them up, as opposed to these feet aren't going to do those kinds of things. But these ones aren't going to help me propel myself through water, whereas these ones are. So again, it's just having that bit of conversation again with them. Versus 4 feet, okay, familiar animals that they have. They might want to talk about their pets they have at home. Versus birds. Birds have that unique ability to fly and position themselves very differently, certainly something that we can't do. Versus no feet at all. So we have our fish, we have our whales, we have our animals that live in the ocean. We have penguins that have wings but don't fly, so a unique bird. So again, it's just, again, revisiting some of those pieces about how do each of these things that we're looking at help for movement in a particular object or animal. And then if I know kind of how I can move and what helps me, the question would be, why do I even want to move? What would be the point in that? And that would be probably my question to pose to children. Why do we want to move? What's the purpose of us moving to anything, for anything during the day? So it might be, moving in bed. I don't like the position I'm in, so I turn myself over, or need to get up and go to the washroom, or I need to get up for the day and I'm going to go brush my teeth or whatever. So just unpacking all those different reasons they can think of, and even starting a list on the board would be something I would like to do, just so they can fill it and say, here's all the reasons that we move, and try not to repeat the kinds of things that they have. But again, if they have physical interests where they are involved in sports, why they move there, and what are other reasons that we move to stay healthy? We're not just about moving, about doing a sport, but why else do we? Because we want to stay healthy and we need to get to places. That's the other reason that we move. So again, having reasons why we move, and then are those reasons the same if we were talking about an animal? Are the animals moving for the same reason, or do the animals have different ones? I don't see too many dogs playing hockey, so clearly I'm not going to be using that for movement. But do dogs have sports? When they chase a ball, it could be considered a sport or a game for them. So yes, they're running to do that, or get away from injury or a predator that's after them. So again, making those lists and having that comparison about what's similar and what's different between, let's say, animals outside of humans and humans. Do we have any commonalities in there? So again, looking at some of the things that they've already studied, and this isn't really mentioned in your curriculum, but I just thought it was a really good place to bring this back in because it does tie into movement. Again, how do seasons affect animal movement? Like why do animals move other than just going to get food and to get away from prey? We also have learned already, so that they can start to bring some of their learning back, that we move to when we're migration is a good reason for movement. Hibernation is another one. I move myself into some place where it's going to be safe. I'm going to be there for the next couple of months. I need to have a place where I'm not going to get injured or whatever. So again, it's just having those conversations and starting to now connect some of those organizing ideas and things that we've learned into one sort of common piece. We also did sorting of cards. We did the sorts in Matter, and we used some living system sorts from grade 1 there. And that would be another time to bring those cards out again. You can click this on, but you don't have to right now. But the cards had the pictures of animals on them. We had them sort them out based on, you know, where they lived. We had them sort based on whether they had fur or not fur, whatever. Now I could say you might want to sort them based on how they moved. And we actually did do that when we did one of our sorts. We had them figure out how they moved. So that children had them in 4 feet, 2 feet, no feet. So again, I could revisit those same cards and use them now from the perspective of movement. Which animals would you put into groups that move the same way? And then again, the power is not so much about what's in the pile as how they explain to you what's the reason about what's in the pile. That these are all animals that are able to fly. These are all animals that have 4 feet and can move on 4 feet, right? So having that conversation. And then what are the similarities and differences? So if I've gotten lots and lots of ideas, and I've done lots of examples of how animals move, where they move, reasons that they're moving, now I need to have a new scenario again. And again, sometimes teachers are saying, I'm running out of ideas, so where do I go? Well, if you've kind of exhausted every kind of living thing that's around you and your surrounding that's close by, maybe what you need to do is just take advantage of a virtual. You don't always have to be right outside or going into your neighborhood. Those are the tangible learning ones when I can go outside the schoolyard and just use that as my classroom. That's a great place for me to learn. But now I need something that's beyond just that. So maybe you go for a virtual field trip to the zoo and ask them some questions about specific animals, or that they get to pick one animal. And now they're going to talk to you a little bit about that animal and how that animal moves and why that animal moves and what have they learned about that animal and that type of thing. Or if you're in an urban center and you've never been to a farm, maybe you do a virtual farm, or maybe you go visit a farm and let them, again, experience how animals are moving. And with a farm, there's generally all kinds of animals out there that they can look at. Okay, or just getting some pictures and using a picture. And again, prompting them some ideas. The key will be is to pick things that they haven't seen. So in this particular one, you're at a zoo, which is going to give them giraffes, and it's going to give them rhinoceros, and all those animals that obviously aren't walking around their house and not tucked into bed with them at night. So those would be good examples that they could use or draw upon. The other possibility would be, when we talk about this as just kindergarten as well, what about them, right? This is, a lot of this stuff is kindergarten that can be adapted to grade 1. We're going to, you know, that we can talk about there, but what about them? How would they move? How would they describe themselves? How would they describe how they move, where they move, why they move, right? They can just fill these in. Either they can draw pictures, or they can write the words, or they can put a little bit of a story. However, how do they see themselves in the global discussion that we've had about movement? I could take the hula hoops, and we've talked about hula hoops many, many times before, that they are by far the best sort of Venn diagram that we can create, because I can just drop them on the floor in the classroom, gets the kids out of their seat, lets them get on the floor and really use big areas and space to maybe take the cards that we sorted and put them in here, depending on what you're asking me to find. Or maybe you're asking me to compare 2 different animals. All the things that I've learned about that animal, are there things that are unique about that animal and unique about the animal number 2? And are there things that they shared in common? They both have 4 feet, okay, but they do something different. Okay, they both, one migrates to a warmer climate, one doesn't, right? That would be another difference between them. So again, this is a great way for us to see what students' thinking is. Again, the explanation will become the biggest piece of that. Okay, Ted, did you have anything you wanted to add to that before we get into computing science?
I have to mute myself. No, that's it, Chris. You've covered it all, for sure.
Okay. So the last piece to remember is that Ange Deering has created sort of a mini slide deck for you and a lesson that you can use specifically for energy in kindergarten. And you're welcome to use her slide deck and the activity that's in there. The video will step you through that on how do I connect computing science into energy. So she's done a great job of putting those together for you so that you don't have to kind of find your way through. And that is our energy for kindergarten. So I know it seems odd. I mean, normally we would be doing this with snow on the ground and it would seem quite comfortable, but it does seem odd with green grass outside for us to be saying, you know, we do wish you a very Merry Christmas, because we will not see you again, certainly not before Christmas. And you are done your sessions now for K-3. So again, at any time, if you feel that you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to reach out. These will be posted to the ARPDC site. Are the energy Earth systems already up, Ted, or are they not yet there? They're up already.
Yes,
Okay,
Earth systems already posted, yeah.
Okay, so they are there, and then this one will be not too far in the distant future. And then also just always keep an eye out for the CPAR documents, the curriculum planning, assessment, and resource documents that we've created. The Living Systems was already posted. We're going to repost it because it's got a brand new look to it, so it's going to get reposted. And then Earth Systems will be the next one to come up. So just keep your eye out for those as well, so that you know what's there for additional resources, and those documents will give you a hand with that as well. So I'll stop our recording, and if anybody has any questions, I don't want people to feel uncomfortable being recorded.